So, Donald Trump has won the 2024 election. And I just want to state some of my thoughts on this outcome and what is likely going to happen afterward. Now, for the record, I did encourage people to vote for Trump. Like, I'm Canadian, so I can't vote in this election, despite what some people would say. I can't. But nonetheless, I supported Trump and told people to vote for him because I think that Trump losing and the Democrats winning would simply be too demoralizing for the white American population and for people with socially right-wing views in general. I just think seeing what we've had in Canada with Trudeau being in power for so long, I just feel that despite the problems with Trump, with his platform, with his demeanor, with him as a person, and there are many, many problems with him, despite all that, I just think that the outcome of a Kamala Harris victory would have been too demoralizing and would further the decline of essentially white America as an entity. And also, frankly, it would just create more inertia. And I think Trump winning increases the chances of things changing on a big scale, of actual revolutionary systemic change happening within the American system. I think Trump winning increases the chances of that. I'm not saying he's going to personally enact such a revolution. In fact, of course, he won't. But I'm saying it destabilizes things a bit more, which I think is actually a good thing in the long run, because I think stability is the worst thing possible. We're losing the peace. Like, we need some sort of disruption, some sort of realigning of the status quo. And I think Trump being the victor increases the chances of that happening. It sets the dominoes into motion. Whereas Kamala winning would just increase the amount of inertia and increase the chances that nothing is really going to fundamentally change over time. That, like a frog in a pot of boiling water, things are just going to slowly go in a more and more neoliberal, multicultural, like woke kind of direction. That being said, there's one aspect of Trump's victory that I did not predict at all, and that really changes the game potentially entirely, which is the fact that Trump had an unprecedented amount of support among Hispanics, and especially Hispanic men. He actually won a majority of the Hispanic male vote in the United States. Now, I've been looking for statistics on this, and I can't find any definitive proof of this, but from looking at the map of California, it looks as if Hispanics voted for Trump at a higher rate than whites overall. Again, I can't verify this. And I know, yes, there are some Hispanics who are actually white. I realize that, but they are still a minority. So nonetheless, when looking at this, like, the Central Valley voted mostly for Trump, whereas the coastal regions voted mostly for Kamala Harris. And the coastal regions, especially outside of Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, like specifically like between LA and San Francisco, I think is like the whitest part of California, aside from like the far north. So like that the coastal region of California between LA and San Francisco voted, I think, entirely for Kamala Harris, whereas the Central Valley, which is far more Hispanic, voted predominantly for Trump. So this is a game changer, because never before in history have Hispanic men or Hispanic women voted in a majority for any Republican candidate I'm pretty sure in any state, even, never mind on the local level. I mean, on the national level. So this is unprecedented. And it really changes the game, because I think in the past, like Republicans and Democrats, it was largely seen as a proxy for racial conflict. Like, the Republicans are the party of the whites, and the Democrats are the party of the non-whites, and then also the party of white liberals who want multiculturalism. But this has now changed, because Trump won massively among Hispanics. Like he almost won the Hispanic vote as a whole, and he did win the Hispanic male vote as a whole. Blacks, no, but he did way better with blacks. I think, well, did he get like 20% or 30% of the black vote? I forget exactly, but he did way better among blacks in this election than any Republican presidential candidate has before. This is a game changer. I'm not sure, did he do better among blacks or Asians? I'm not sure. I think maybe slightly among Asians, but yeah, either way, he's shifted pretty much every racial demographic toward him. I'm not sure about Native Americans. I know there actually were some states where a majority of Native Americans did vote for Trump in previous elections. So I'm not sure. I guess they probably voted more for Trump in this election also. Like if you look at the national map, almost every county in the United States, I think, voted more for Trump in this election than in the previous election, with the exception of a bunch of counties near Atlanta. And I think that's because of blacks more like moving into those counties in greater numbers since the last election. Also, I don't think they were showing on the map I saw the statistics for California. So it'd be interesting to see if those coastal majority white regions of California, like between LA and San Francisco, voted more or less for Trump than in the previous election. But the lines are being drawn increasingly on non-racial lines, but rather along very much partisan lines. It's not like some people frame it as like the major cities versus everyone else, but it's not entirely true because Vermont is not a very urbanized state and it still voted overwhelmingly for Kamala Harris. And some cities did actually vote majority for Trump. Well, at least the county did, where the city's located. Like I know Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Spokane, Colorado Springs, probably several others that can't think of right now, but like the counties where major or semi-major cities are located did vote majority for Trump. Now, granted, in some of these cases, the county includes not only the city, but a lot of suburbs around it. Like, especially in the case of Phoenix, like Maricopa County. And frankly, Phoenix is just one big suburb. Like, it isn't really a city at all. Even the inner city feels suburban. Like, the only part that doesn't feel suburban is like the office buildings. But as soon as you get to any residential area in Phoenix, it feels suburban. Like, there are no urban residential areas in Phoenix. Or if they are just infinitesimally small and they don't matter. It's like we're talking like literally like a block or two, if at all. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Like, I mean, okay, there's some truth to that narrative, but it's not entirely urban versus rural or urban versus suburban and rural. But there are elements of that too, just as there are racial elements. But again, a lot of these lines are becoming blurred. And what I'm saying is that with the racial lines becoming blurred, this could be the final nail of the coffin, in the coffin of ethno-nationalism for white people in the United States. Because a lot of the time, like party politics has been a proxy for ethno-nationalism. But if it isn't anymore, then what next? And I think a lot of white people are going to be, like, even white people who were quote-unquote racist before are now going to be welcoming, essentially, mestizos with open arms because they did vote in large numbers for Trump. The men voted majority for Trump. And I think this is going to further the race blending of America. Like, it's going to further the civic nationalist ethos, the castizoization of America, which is happening. Like, people talk all the time about black men and white women, and they talk all the time about white men and Asian women. But in fact, I'm pretty sure statistically the most common type of mixing in the United States is white and Hispanic. Now, again, some Hispanics are white. That is true. But the majority are not. So a great deal of this mixing between whites and Hispanics is essentially mixing of people of different racial backgrounds. So from an ethno-preservationist standpoint, like if your goal is the preservation of European genetics or European culture in the United States on whatever level, like whether it be like some people have the idea the entirety of the United States should be a white country. Some people have the idea maybe part of the United States should be a white country. Like um, there can be secessionism. Like there can be partition. Um, there's differing perspectives from an ethno-nationalist perspective of what white ethno-nationalism in the United States means. But regardless of what your exact perspective is, the fact is this election, I'm not going to say it takes us further away from that than Kamala Harris winning, because I think Kamala Harris winning would demoralize white people much more so, and I think that's worse. So I'm not saying that from an ethno-nationalist standpoint, Trump winning is a bad thing, but I'm saying that this is an issue that's going to get worse. Like, if you are concerned about the preservation of whiteness, and I get it, not everyone's concerned about that. That's fine. People can have different beliefs. I am tolerant of the fact that people have different beliefs. But I'm just saying, if you are concerned about the idea of preserving some sort of concept of European heritage in a genetic and or cultural sense in the United States, this is a major cause for concern. Because I guarantee you, conservatives are going to be going after that thick Latina booty more so now than ever fucking before. If they ever had any reservations about sticking their dick in the taco shell, or vice versa for, hardline right-wing white women, those reservations are going to be increasingly a thing of the past. And I think castizo futurism is increasingly going to be the reality in the United States. It already is becoming that way. Like, I saw a lot of castizo-looking people when I was in California, that's for sure. Like, there's definitely a lot of that going on, especially in California. But yeah, that's going to be increasingly the norm, and increasingly even among people who are implicitly racist or implicitly far right or whatever. It's because this idea like, oh, there are guys, there are girls, we're the same, like we're Christian, they're part European anyway, they speak a European language, they and there's some truth to that. Like, they do have some things in common with us. I'm not going to say that like Hispanics are the most foreign. No, like they're out of all the 6 major civilizations, they're definitely the closest to us of any of the others. Like, I define the 6 major civilizations as essentially white European, Latin American mestizo, Middle Eastern / North African, which is the majority of the Islamic world, India and its surroundings, like the Indian subcontinent, East Asia, and then Black African. So out of the 6 major civilizations, yes, they're the closest to us. They do have the most in common with us. They do have the most shared heritage. But are they the same as us? I mean, I don't think exactly. Like, I think in some ways they do have different cultural traits. Like, for instance, if you listen to the music that is popular, to me, when I listen to that music, it sounds a bit more like Black American music. Like, not to say all Black American music is fundamentally different from historically white genres, but I mean, it sounds like reggaeton and all that stuff. It has a lot in common with like rap in terms of just the way it sounds, like the types of beats and everything, just the type of energy it exudes. And it's like, also in terms of things like crime rates, like Hispanics do tend to have higher crime rates on average than white people, although that gap has been narrowing in recent years, which is something a lot of right-wingers don't want to admit. The white crime rate has been actually increasing faster relative to where it was before compared to the crime rates for other races. And we're still lower than Hispanics or blacks per capita. Again, I'm talking in a United States context. So I say we, but I'm fucking Canadian. But like, okay, the point is, the gap is narrowing between whites and Hispanics in that regard. And I think the white homelessness epidemic is the main reason behind that. The white drug addiction and homelessness epidemic, and joblessness epidemic. But yeah, that gap is narrowing, but it's still a cause for concern. Like, if you look at Hispanic countries on average compared to white countries on average, um, their crime rates are definitely a lot higher on average. So that is a concern, like the cultural level of tolerance for crime. And it's also just, again, I just think they're different cultures, like, to some extent. Like, I think it has some things in common, but I do think there are aspects of white American culture that deserve to be preserved. It's just the problem is a lot of white Americans don't recognize it and don't have any interest in preserving it. And that goes for both the right and the left. I mean, when it comes to cultural preservation, I think the left are worse in some ways and the right are worse in other ways. But yeah, I'm just saying, like, I do think to some extent, yes, like, I do think there is a white American culture that deserves to be preserved. I'm not talking about this shitty 1950s suburban culture that deserves to be fucking burned to a crisp. That culture deserves to be fucking eliminated and then erased from our collective memory. That culture was a bastardization of our former culture, and too many stupid fucking conservatives think that that is our true culture when it's not. And I say our because, yeah, that actually does affect Canadians too. So, yeah, that actually is something that is a Canadian problem also. But yes, I do think there's aspects of our culture, like our architecture, our traditions, our music, our food, our holidays, festivals, parades, like things like that. Like, I do think there's aspects of white American and white Canadian culture that deserve to be preserved. And I do think they are inextricably linked with whiteness. Now, do white people have a moral right to make the entirety of the United States a white ethno state? I honestly would say no. I don't think it's morally or practically feasible. Do I think they have a right to make part of the United States? I mean, morally speaking, I would say yes. I don't know. Again, like, how to get there from A to B is a question with a lot of tricky issues associated with it, but I would say, yeah, there is a moral right. Now, that being said, I think there's an elephant in the room a lot of people don't want to admit, which is that, frankly, there's large swaths of the United States that I don't think are suitable for white people in terms of the climate. I think there's large swaths of the United States that, frankly, castizos or mestizos would be more, like, racially suited for in terms of, like, their skin color and in terms of the way they react to the sun, the lower rates of skin cancer they get, things like that. But I mean, again, that doesn't apply to the entire United States. But I'm just saying, like, okay, what I'm trying to say is, like, I do think this is a big cause for concern. And I think the problem with much of the far right is that they've created unattainable goals, and because they've realized they're never going to meet these goals, they've just thrown out the baby with the bathwater and abandoned ethno-nationalism entirely. It's like, no, you were never going to take back the entirety of the United States. But, oh, maybe if we weren't idiots, we could carve out our piece of it. I'm sure many other people are going to be carving out their pieces of the United States also. And because I think the American empire is ultimately doomed to collapse. And I think, frankly, electing Trump hastens that process, which is a good thing, because he's not the candidate of stability. There's a reason why the establishment hates him so much. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of that goal. And I think a lot of people are losing sight of it. And again, they're losing sight of it because they created this completely unrealistic goal for themselves. And now that they realize we're going to fall short of it, they've realized it's impossible. They've just abandoned ethno-nationalism entirely and embraced civic nationalism instead. And frankly, there's no reason we can't be amicable with other peoples. Like, if we carve out our own part of the United States, there's no reason we can't be friendly with the other parts, you know? Like, it doesn't have to be, like, some sort of like situation where we're in total war with everyone else, you know? And I just think people have completely lost sight of this, and like the unironic moonmanism of the 2010s didn't help. Like, it made us ghouls. Like, we came across as ghouls, and frankly, I'm guilty of that. I fully admit it. Some of my shit from the 2010s went way too far, you know? I kind of feel like Eminem now when he's looking back at his older material. I kind of feel the same way when looking back at my older videos. Oh, and just like Eminem, guess what? He was bigger back then. He was more popular back then because he gave the people what they wanted, which is like the edgiest fucking shit possible. And it's like, oh, now that I'm older and more mature, I realize, oh, you know, some of that shit was kind of like, yeah, not the greatest things to say. Similar age too. I mean, I'm obviously much younger than he is now, but I was the same age, I think, as when he put out the Marshall Mathers LP, when I did a lot of my most viewed videos back in the 2010s. So I mean, there's a bit of a parallel there. But yeah, I get it. Like, we went too far. We said a lot of stupid shit, and we had a lot of bad optics. And we're paying the price for that now because people have abandoned like platforms like TRS. Who the fuck is Richard Spencer now? He's a nobody now. Countercurrents, does anyone read that anymore? I mean, I guess some people still read The Stormer, but what does Anglin even... I don't know. I guess he's still an ethno-nationalist. Yeah, I mean, he is. But he's also like... He basically douses it with a heavy dose of libertarianism, so there is that. And frankly, back then, I would have said that my main goal was the preservation of, you know, of white people, white culture. Nowadays, I'd say it's one of my goals, but would I say it's my main goal or my only goal? No. I mean, frankly, climate change is probably the biggest threat that faces humanity as a whole, and we do need to address that. But yeah, I still do believe in the preservation of different cultures, different races, and I do still believe that the left they're hateful against white people. They want genocide against white people. They want white people to be gone from the face of the planet or to be reduced to a tiny minority. They have a very selective view of history where they only look at colonialism and genocide and slavery committed by white peoples, and they completely ignore all the colonialism, genocide, and slavery committed by non-white peoples. They brush it under the rug like it's insignificant. I have not abandoned any of these principles, unlike many people on the fucking right, okay? I don't talk about it as much as I used to because there's so much fucking censorship, but I have not abandoned these beliefs. And what I'm saying is this Trump victory, I think, is going to further many people abandoning these beliefs. But again, I think a Kamala Harris victory would have been even worse in that regard because of the demoralization factor and because of the increased immigration factor. I do think Trump probably won't let in as many immigrants as Harris would have, but he's not going to stop the flow entirely. Let's be honest. Yeah, just like he didn't in his first term, but he did, I think he did reduce it somewhat. And he sure as hell didn't increase it in the way fucking Justin Trudeau did in Canada. Oh my gosh. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I do think this is a concern going forward. And we're going to have to do some soul searching and ask ourselves, who are we and what do we stand for? And I don't think this means, you know, we don't have to be assholes like we were in the 2010s. We don't have to call people like subhuman or inferior or use terms like racial hygiene that just sound very insulting and dehumanizing. But I do think preservation of culture and genetics is important, and I think the two do go hand in hand. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my thoughts on that.